Another step in the evolution of comic books was the ever-weakening hold the Comics Code had on the industry. While in the late 50s and early 60s, most mainstream publishers complied fully with the restrictive code, this gradually began to change. More socially relevant storylines began pushing the envelope of what was acceptable according to the code. Social awareness and discussions of politics became common in mainstream comics, although not in the openly abrasive fashion of the underground comics that were rising in popularity at the same time. Most notable in this sense is the run on the Green Lantern series that was written by Dennis O'Neil and illustrated by Neil Adams for DC Comics beginning in 1969. The issues co-starred Green Arrow and were extremely progressive for its time. Green Arrow was portrayed as a leftist, anti-establishment crusader, while his companion, Green Lantern, began to see his more right-wing ideals crumble around him. In each issue, the two faced relevant social concerns meant to open readers' eyes and make them think. Over at Marvel, a similar trend was present. The Hulk empathized with minorities who faced bigotry. The Silver Surfer witnessed with horror the atrocities human beings commit upon each other. Tony Stark, Iron Man's civilian identity, pulled his business out of the munitions manufacturing trade out of guilt over his involvement in Vietnam. Spider-Man's alter ego, Peter Parker, came across corrupt politicians, anti-war protesters, militant African-American youths, and watched his best friend succumb to drug addiction. Even Captain America became disillusioned by a web of conspiracy and corruption in the highest levels of government. It was the aforementioned drug story in The Amazing Spider-Man that finally clashed head-on with the code. The Nixon administration's Department of Health, Education, and Welfare asked Stan Lee in 1970 to incorporate an anti-drug message into one of his comic books. The resulting three-part story was powerful and effective in getting the message across without being preachy, but due to the Comics Code restrictions against any mention of drug use, it did not pass the code. Undaunted and confident that the moral importance of the story outweighed any code guidelines, Marvel ran the books anyway, without code approval. The issues sold well despite the absence of the code stamp on their covers. It became clear that the Comics Code needed to be revised, if not abandoned completely. The growing drug problem could not be continued to be ignored, and with the times being so turbulent, including an unpopular war, racial division, and weakening faith in the government, the Code's assumption that authority was beyond reproach had to be done away with as well. Thus, the guidelines of the Comics Code were relaxed so that drug use could be portrayed, though never in a positive manner, and the restriction on disrespect for established authority was lifted. Monsters could also appear once again in comic books, as long as they adhered to the tradition of classic horror, such as Frankenstein, Dracula, and the works of Edgar Allan Poe, and didn't violate the Code's standards of good taste. This, of course, led to the horror genre returning to the mainstream. Comic books such as Tomb of Dracula, Werewolf by Night, Swamp Thing, and Ghost Rider took advantage of this, but usually didn't sell terribly well, though they were often rather well written.